All right, good morning. Today our lesson is going to be on the types of sequences, and you want to take notes on this. Again, I know that the other day you had to write down some notes that were on a previous screen that did talk about arithmetic and geometric sequences already and what a sequence actually is, but I want to make sure that you write it down again and take some notes on it just to make sure that you remember exactly what they are. And then we're going to add a little bit to that today about just, again, making sure we understand how to find a pattern from the exploration that you did the last 2 days, and how to find the zeroth term. And then the next couple days we're going to be writing equations for our sequences. So pause the video at any point in time so that way you can write these down, starting with types of sequences. So again, you want to write this out. Types of sequences, there are 3 types of sequences, mainly 2. You have your arithmetic, you have your geometric, and we're going to have some that don't fall in either of these categories. They still have patterns. They may or may not have patterns, but they don't fall in either one of these 2 categories, okay? So let's talk about arithmetic. Arithmetic means that we are going to have a constant added each time. So we are going to increase with the same constant. Thinking about you are adding the same amount each time. So add same amount each time. So this one's a tricky one because a lot of times, This one's a tricky one because a lot of times people think adding has to be a positive number. We can also consider subtracting part of this category because subtraction is the same thing as adding a negative. So if I have a sequence that's going down, but it's going down by 3 every single time, then that's the same thing as adding a negative 3 or subtracting 3. So arithmetic deals with adding and subtracting the same amount every single time. You're adding and subtracting a constant. Okay? Geometric is multiplying the same amount or a constant each time. So again, we consider division similar to this because even though dividing isn't exactly multiplying, you can divide by 2 or you can multiply by half, and those are the exact same thing. So geometric deals with multiplying and dividing every time. You're multiplying the same amount. So if it's getting twice as big every single time, that would be a geometric sequence. Or if you're cutting it in half every single time, aka multiplying by half or dividing by 2, that would also be geometric. Neither is, I just don't have a pattern. Maybe it's like 1, 5, 20, 2, 3, like a random thing. Neither could also be if it's not going up by the same amount every time. So on the exploration, we had a couple where you went up by odd numbers. That's a pattern. We're going up by 1, then by 3, then by 5, then by 7, then by 9. So you know the next one's going to go up by 11 and 13 and 15. But that doesn't fall under one of these 2 because it's not adding the same amount every single time. You're adding different numbers every time. So that's a sequence and it's a pattern, but it's not arithmetic or geometric. It's its own special one. So that would fall under the neither category. It doesn't go under either of these 2. There were, some where you would I think there was one where you had to add the next number in the pattern. So the pattern was 1, 1, 2, 5, 8, and then it kept going. And you noticed that on the top of the pattern, it was adding that same pattern. Well, yeah, we can tell that that's a pattern, but we don't know that's not an arithmetic or a geometric pattern, if that makes sense. So today, on your assignments, you're going to have a bunch of sections where it's asking you to determine, is this arithmetic, geometric, or neither? So again, keeping in mind, we want to ask ourselves, is it going up by the same amount each time by being added or subtracted? If that's the case, then it's arithmetic. Or is it going up or down by multiplying or dividing? And then that's going to be geometric. If it's not going up by the same amount each time, so if for one time it goes up by 5, and then the next time it goes up by 10, and then the next time it goes up by 15, so you can see that it's increasing in, 5 increments, it's going to be neither, because it doesn't fall under each of those. It's not going up by the same amount each time. There is a pattern, but not the same. So let's look at a couple examples. So again, write those definitions in your notes and then write down these examples, okay? So here we have 2, 5, 8, and 11. So again, first of all, I want to ask myself, is it going up or down? In this case, it's getting larger, so we know that it's either going to be adding or multiplying. So then we want to check from 2 to 5, what's happening? Okay, well, from 2 to 5, I'm either adding 3 or 2 times what gives me 5, that's going to be a decimal. I mean, yes, I could have a decimal, which is perfectly fine. If I don't know how to figure out what that would be multiplying, I can work backwards and divide. 5 divided by 2 and see what I get, okay? But I can tell in this pattern that we're going to be adding 3 each time. So in the assignment today, it's going to ask you several questions. First question it's going to ask you is, number 1, is this arithmetic, geometric, or neither? Well, we can see that it's adding the same constant every single time. Adding is arithmetic. So we will write out, hold on. Yep. There we go. Sadly enough, spelling does matter on this, only because in Schoology, if you misspell it, it will mark it wrong. So please write this out in your notes, so that way this one and geometric out in your notes. It's also in the directions of each assignment, but make sure you spell it correctly, okay? So this one's arithmetic. The second question it's going to ask you is, what are my next 3 terms? So we're going to go ahead and fill out my next 3 terms. So obviously if I add 3 more to this, I'm going to get 14. Then if I add 3 more to this, I'm going to get 17. And if I add 3 more, I'm going to get 20. The next question it's going to ask you is, what is the pattern, or how much is it growing by? So in this case, we already know that the pattern is going to be adding 3. If it asks you to tell me just the number, then you would say it's increasing by 3, just 3. And then the very last question it's going to ask you is, what is the 0th term? So it's going to say 0th term. This is something that we haven't really talked about yet, so let's talk about it right now. This is my first term in the sequence. This is my second term. This is my third term. And this is my 4th term in the sequence. I want to know what number would come before 2 if I were finding this 0th term. So I'm going to think about, okay, well, I'm adding 3 each time. So if I'm working backwards to figure out what I did, I'm going to think about subtracting 3. So then I'm going to do 2 minus 3, and that's going to give me a -1. -1 is going to be my 0th term. This is going to be very important in writing an equation tomorrow. So that's why I wanted us to talk about it a little bit today. So 0th terms means find the number that's in front of the original first term by doing the opposite. So in this case, if I'm adding 3 each time, I'm going to subtract 3 to find my first number. If I'm multiplying by 2 each time, I'm going to divide by 2 to find my first number. If I'm multiplying by half every time, I'm going to divide by half. If I'm subtracting 8 every time, then I'm going to add 8 to find my 0th term. I'm going to do the opposite, okay? Let's look at another one. what about if I had 3, 7, 15, 31, and 63? Alright, so we're looking at this one, so we're going to say, okay, it's getting bigger, so we know it's either adding or multiplying. Okay, so we can look, again, multiplying 3 times what equals 7? That's going to be a decimal. Again, we can totally try it and see if it works. Let's actually try that and see what it is. So again, we don't know, we might not know, okay, I have no clue what 3 times what is 7. So then divide. 7 divided by 3, I'm going to get 2.3. So I'm either multiplying by 2.3 or looks like I might be adding 4. Okay, let's check. From here to here. From here to here. Okay, so I can either take 15 and divide it by 7. I get 2.1. So I know I'm not multiplying by the same because there's 2 different numbers. So multiplying's out. But let's try this adding stuff still. From 7 to 15 is plus 8. And then 31 minus 15 is 16. And then 63 minus 31 is 32. Okay, so I'm seeing a pattern here. It went up by 4, then 8, then 16, then 32. So the pattern that I'm adding each time is doubling. Started with 4, and then it went up to 8, then it went up to 16. So I'm adding, and there is a pattern. However, this is not a rhythmic because it's not going up by the same each time. Which means in this case, my answer would be neither. So that would be my type of sequence. I could potentially find my next 3 because I know I'm going to add by 64 next, and then I'm going to add by 128 next, and then I'm going to add by, let's see, 156 last, like that. So I could find my next 3 terms that way. And then I can tell you my pattern. My pattern is it's the amount I'm adding is doubling each time. So I can say the amount I'm adding is doubling each time. And then I can find my 0th term because, again, if it's doubling each time, this doubled, which means half of that would be 2. So I'm going to subtract 2 and get a 1 as my 0th term. That would be if I had neither. Let's do one more. Let's say I had, let's see, 64, 32, 16, and 8. All right, last one. Here we go. So we notice it's getting lower each time. So again, it's either going to be dividing or subtracting. So I'm going to look at my pattern and I'm going to say, okay, to get from 64 to 32, I'm either subtracting 32 or I'm dividing by 2. Okay, well here also looks like I'm dividing by 2 or subtracting 16. Here it looks like I'm dividing by 2 or subtracting 8. So again, I have a pattern here. I have 2 patterns. One that actually is the same and one that's not. I don't want to use the one that's not. Okay? So always try both. So I know that my pattern is dividing by 2, which means I'm going to divide 8 by 2 and get 4. I'm going to divide 4 by 2 and get 2. I'm going to divide 2 by 2 and get 1. Those are my next 3 terms. Because we're dividing each time, that tells me that it is going to be geometric. Because I'm dividing by 2 each time, that means when I work backwards, I'm going to multiply by 2. 64 times 2 is going to be 128. So this tells me my 0th term. And I believe that's all the questions. Again, make sure that you've copied those 3 examples down in your notes. Make sure that you've copied those 2 definitions and what neither means in your notes.